Welcome to Middle English Literature. One of the most prominent authors of medieval period is Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer is the greatest English poet of the Middle Ages. He is also considered as the father of English literature. He was born sometime around 1343 in London. He came from a wealthy family and had many high-powered jobs. The printing press had not yet been invented, so the first copy of his works were handwritten. He was born in London in the 1340s, though the exact date is not known. As a teenager, he worked as a royal page. Later, as a diplomat, he traveled widely throughout Europe as an emissary for the king. These positions gave him the opportunity to meet people from all social classes and many different countries. He also became fluent in several languages, including French and Italian. In 1357, Geoffrey Chaucer became a public servant to Countess Elizabeth of Ulster and continued in that capacity with the British court throughout his lifetime. The Canterbury Tales became his best-known and most acclaimed work. He died October 25, 1400s in London, England, and was the first to be buried in Westminster Abbey's Poets' Corner.
Canterbury Tales consists of 24 stories, each told by one of Chaucer's spirited characters. Narrators include familiar medieval figures such as a knight, a clock, and a nun. The tales was written in Middle English, which often looks entirely different from the language spoken today. It was used between the 12th and 15th centuries and evolved from Old English. Due to increased contact to European Romantic languages after the Norman conquest of 1066. It touches on subjects ranging from fate to God's will to love, marriage, pride, and death. The Canterbury Tales is considered Chaucer's masterpiece and is among the most important works of medieval literature for many reasons besides its poetic power and entertainment value, notably its depiction of the different social classes of the 14th century CE, as well as clothing worn, pastimes enjoyed, and language or expressions used. The Canterbury Tales consists of the stories related by the 29 pilgrims on their way to St. Thomas Becket's shrine in Canterbury. Harry Bailey, the host, had proposed a scheme in the general prologue whereby each pilgrim was to narrate 2 tales on the way to Canterbury and 2 more while returning. However, the Canterbury Tales are incomplete. There should have been 120 tales in all according to the original plan, but Chaucer only completed 23 tales. Out of these, the Cook's and the Squire's tales are unfinished. The Knight tells the first tale. The Canterbury Tales is a story within a story. He uses a frame narrative to set up who all of the characters are, and then the characters each tell stories of their own. Chaucer's prologue begins with a description of springtime. The April rains drench the ground, and roots deep in the soil absorb the powerful liquid which gives rise to flowering plants. The young sun shines down on these new plants, and birds sing. People, too, want to go on pilgrimages to faraway places, especially Canterbury Cathedral, to receive the blessings of the holy blissful martyr Thomas Becket, calling themselves pilgrims or people or traveler who are on a journey to a holy place. The main purpose of the prologue is to introduce the pilgrims through description, so it frames the rest of the tales. It is to give readers a general overview of the characters that are present, why they are present there, and what they will be doing in the tale. The story goes like this. Chaucer is one of these pilgrims who wanted to visit the Canterbury Cathedral, and he is staying at the Tabard Inn in Southwark before embarking on the journey to Canterbury. A large group of pilgrims, 29 in all, arrive at the inn, and they are such a friendly group, he decides to join their company. He introduces each one in turn, describing their professions, social status, and clothing. After Chaucer introduces the company, he describes the host, a plump, bright-eyed man who takes a liking to the company of pilgrims and decides that he, too, will go with them to Canterbury. To make the time go by more quickly on the journey, each of the company will tell 2 stories on the way there and 2 on the way back. He will judge the stories, and the person who tells the best one will win a free meal at the inn when they return. Everyone agrees to this competition, and as they set off the next morning, they draw lots to see who will go first. The knight draws the shortcut, so he must begin the game, which he does cheerfully. So here is the knight's tale. Long ago, as all histories tell us, there was a duke called Theseus, the Duke of Athens, was a mighty conqueror that there was none greater under the sun. He had subdued many rich countries, and with his wisdom and knighthood had conquered all the realm of the Amazons, land of women, and taking the queen of the Amazons, Hippolyta, as his wife, and brought her home with him to his country in great glory and pomp, and her young sister Emily with her. The story begins as he is returning home from this conquest. As he nears Athens, he comes upon a large crowd of grieving women. Taken aback, he asks them what is wrong. The eldest explains that they are waiting here at the temple of Clemency to ask Theseus' help. She is the queen, Capaneus' wife, and the others all noble ladies cast down by fortune. They tell him their husbands have been killed by the forces of King Creon, who will not even let them retrieve the bodies of the dead. Theseus is angered and swears to kill Creon. He raised them all up in his arms and comforted them kindly, and swore an oath that he was a true knight. He would strive to take such vengeance upon the tyrant Creon, the king of Thebes. He leaves immediately carry out his oath, sending Hippolyta and her sister Emily into Athens. Theseus and his forces then ride to Thebes, and dismounted in a beautiful open field where he thought he fought with Creon. He kills Creon, captures the city, and returns the remains of the slain men to their wives. He restored to the ladies the bones of their husbands to perform their rituals, which were then the custom. As the pillagers ransacked the bodies, the heralds recognized among the wounded 2 princes of the royal blood, born of sisters. Theseus sends them to Athens to dwell in prison perpetually. Of these 2, one was called Acrit, and the other knight Palamon. He takes them as his prisoner. The 2 knights live as prisoners for years. Years pass. One May morning, the beautiful Emily goes a-maying in the garden below the tower in which the prisoners are held. She gathers flowers and sings like an angel. Palamon sees Emily through the bars of his window and falls instantly in love and cries out in pain. His fellow prisoner Akret, his cousin, thinks he is depressed by their imprisonment and urges him to accept their destiny. They are victims of the stars. "You are mistaken," Palamon says. "I was wounded through the eye by the woman or goddess I saw in the garden." He kneels and prays to Venus that if she is indeed the woman whom he saw in the garden, she help him and Akret out of prison. Then Akret looks out. Akret looks through the window, sees Emily, and is wounded as badly as Palamon. He says he must have her mercy and her grace, and he, too, falls instantly in love. They argue about who saw her first. Palamon is angered. He reminds Akret that they are not only cousins but sworn brothers. He loved Emily first, and Akret is duty-bound to help him. Akret replies that he loved her first. Palamon thought she was a goddess, not a woman. Besides, love is greater law than any other, and other laws may be easily broken in its name. While they fight over her at first, they soon realize that there is no point in fighting, since they were both trapped in the tower, and therefore equally unlikely ever to meet her, let alone marry her. One day, Theseus' dearest friend Pirithous comes for a visit. He knows Akret well and pleads with Theseus to release him. Akret is later released from prison and exile. Theseus frees Akret with the condition that he, on pain of death, never return to Athens. Because Akret loves Emily, this seems like a fate worse than prison. Akret is devastated by the news of his release. He would rather remain in prison, for then he would at least have the sight of she whom he loves. He repents that he ever wanted out of prison. Alas, how little we understand the workings of fortune. We often desire what brings our own distraction. I wanted freedom from prison. Now that freedom exiles me from happiness, without the sight of Emily, I shall die. He thinks that Palamon, still in prison, is better off. Palamon, meanwhile, envies Akret's freedom because he is now free from prison and can return to Thebes, where he can raise an army and make war on Athens while he must remain in prison. Going back in Thebes, Akret continues to pine away for Emily, where he so suffers for love that he neither eats nor drinks. He is so afflicted with love sickness that his entire appearance, even his voice, is so changed that no one would recognize him. One night, he has a dream of the god Mercury, who tells him to go to Athens. He dresses like a poor worker and goes to Athens, where he serves under the name Philostrate on Emily's household. Over the years, he becomes one of Theseus' most valued men. Theseus is so impressed that he makes him a squire of his household and holds him dear. This continues for 3 years. Meanwhile, Palamon has spent 7 years in prison. One May night, he is able to escape with the help of a friend. Akret decides to go for a ride in the woods, and it happens to be the same woods where Palamon is hiding. Palamon sees Akret, but he does not recognize him. When Palamon finally recognizes Akret, he bursts out of hiding enraged and challenges Akret to a duel. The next day, Akret and Palamon are in the midst of their duel when Theseus providentially gets a sudden urge to go hunting. Fate, which executes God's will, is so strong that sometimes something happens that will not happen again in 1,000 years. All is ruled by God's foresight. Theseus, who loves to hunt the great hart in May, has risen early and ridden out a hunting, accompanied by Hippolyta and Emily, all clad in green, and they come to the forest where Palamon and Acret are fighting. With Hippolyta and Emily, he rides out into the woods and comes upon the men. Theseus breaks up their fight, and Palamon reveals who he is and the fact that Philostrate is really Acret. They admit they both deserve death. Indeed, Theseus decides to kill both of them, but the women in the hunting party, his queen, and so does Emily, beg Theseus to have mercy, until at last his anger abates. Pity comes quickly to a noble heart. Theseus forgives the two young men and says that both of them is worthy to marry Emily, but obviously she cannot marry both. Theseus agrees and proposes a tournament that, in a year's time, they each bring 100 knights, and whoever slays his opponent out of the lists will win Emily. The two young men rejoice and return to Thebes to gather their armies to battle for Emily's hand in marriage. Duke Theseus spends a large amount of money preparing for the tournament. He builds a large stadium with tired rows for spectators. At the east gate, he builds a large temple devoted to Venus. At the west gate, he constructs a temple dedicated to Mars, and at the north gate, he raises a temple dedicated to Diana. When all is ready, Acret and Palamon arrive with their knights. To prepare for the contest, Palamon goes to the temple devoted to Venus and prays that the goddess will allow him to win. He prays to Venus to have mercy on him and vows to be her true servant. He does not ask for victory, but only that he have Emily. He makes his sacrifice, and the statue of Venus is motionless for a while, and then shakes. He takes this as a sign that his prayer will be answered, though with some delay. Emily goes to the temple of Diana and prays that she may remain a virgin rather than a wife, either of the two. Diana tells her that she must be married to one of the men. Acret goes to the temple of Mars and prays for victory. Help me in the battle tomorrow, and I will be your true servant forever. The fires on the altar flared up. A sweet smell came up from the ground. Mars' armor clattered, and a low voice murmured, "Victory." He too receives a sign that he will win. The god Saturn, knowing that both men have been promised Emily, must work out a plan to solve this problem. Before the contests, everyone is busy getting ready. Some are placing bets. Theseus declares that knives, crossbows, poleaxes, and several other weapons are not allowed. He also forbids killing uninjured men and sets other restrictions. The contest lasts until evening, when at last Palamon is wounded and unhorsed. Theseus declares Acret the winner. Venus is angry that Palamon did not win, but Saturn reassures her that it will be your turn soon. As Acret rides toward Emily, his horse suddenly throws him from its back. His injury proves to be fatal, and he dies. Theseus, believing that after grief there should be bliss, tells Emily and Palamon to marry. "Sister," says Theseus to Emily, "my advice and that of my parliament is that you show some pity unto Palamon and take him as your husband. He is a king's son, and he has served you for many years. He tells Palamon to take Emily's hand. The bond of marriage was made between them, and they were wed with great bliss. He serves her so gently, and he loves her so tenderly, that there was never a jealous nor argumentative word between them. Thus ends the tale. God save this company. They do and live in contentment and love unbroken. The Knight's Tale is considered a romance, a story about noble characters in distant lands or times, with themes of love and chivalry. Typically, romances end with a marriage. In most ways, this tale fulfills these criteria. The characters are idealized. Theseus is described as noble and manly. Emily is beautiful and gentle. The knights are eager to fight for victory and glory. The tale does end with a marriage, although the ironic twist of Emily's engagement to two men is typical of Chaucer's sense of humor. The theme of love, sex, and fellowship plays an important part in this tale. The nature of love is explored throughout the story. The two knights fall instantly in love with Emily when they see her. Love trumps any other friendships, rules, or courtesies. As Acret says, in love, each for himself alone, there is no other. Love also makes men into fools, after the two knights a might. In the general prologue, the knight is described as the very flower of chivalry, and his tale espouses many of the ideals of chivalry and courtly love. Both Acret and Palamon are knights who place their love for their lady, Emily, over all other concerns, including their own deaths. They lose asleep and utter eloquent, long-winded poetic complaints, detailing their all-consuming love for their idealized lady. In the courtly love tradition, lovers were expected to behave in precisely this manner. Meanwhile, the ending of the tale is foreshadowed in the visits to the various shrines. Acret seeks the help of the god of war and manages to win the tournament, but loses his life and Emily. Palamon seeks the help of the goddess of love, and while he loses the tournament, he wins Emily's hand in marriage. Only Emily, who prays to remain single, does not get her wish. However, if she is troubled by this result, the tale doesn't tell us. The tale's main theme is that life itself is unstable. Joy and sorrow are never far apart, and fortune can change at a moment's notice.
Before I'll tell you the squire's tale, for your information, the squire is the son of the knight. The two characters are different in many aspects of their personality and appearance. The squire wears flashy clothes, going to great lengths to stand out, while the knight simply selects clothes that will serve the purpose of covering his body and protecting him in battle. The knight fought in battle to protect his religion, while the squire fought in more worldly political battles in hopes to win his lady's grace. And a true devout Christian, the knight joined the pilgrimage fresh from battle to further his faith. Meanwhile, the squire treats the soul-searching trip like a secular vacation, as shown through the subject matter of his tale, which is about his favorite subjects, young women, and courtly love. Now, the squire tells a tale of Cambuscan, the king of Sarai and Tartary. King Cambuscan in his time was of so great renown that there was nowhere in the wide world known. This noble king was a man of many good qualities, hardy, rich, wise, merciful, just, true to his word, benign, and honorable. He had two sons on Alfeta, his wife, and a beautiful daughter named Candace. On the Ides of March, King Cambuscan, high in the palace, mounted on his throne, with crown and royal vestments, held a splendid lavish feast to celebrate his 20th year as a king. While he sat in his state that day, there came a strange knight upon a steed of brass, holding in hand a mirror broad of glass. On his thumb he had a golden ring, and by his side a naked sword hanging. This strange knight was armed at all points except his head, salutes the king and queen. He then gives an elaborate speech to the king and presents his gifts. He offers the king 4 gifts. First is a brass horse that can transport a person anywhere in the world within 24 hours. Second, a mirror that shows impending misfortunes and the character of friends and foes. And third, a sword whose edge will cut through any armor and whose flat will heal any wound caused by its edge. To the king's daughter, Candace, the knight gives the 4th gift, a golden ring that allows the wearer to understand every language, even that of animals, like the language of any bird. The mirror and sword were kept and locked in the tower. However, no one can move the horse until the knight explains how to make it move, and that is through turning the pin in its ear. Then everyone goes to bed and sleep except for Candace, who can't stop thinking about the mirror and the ring. The next morning, Candace wakes up early and lightly to play and walk on maiden feet, together with her 5 to 6 women maids. The birds are singing, and when he heard them, he knew well what they meant and learned all their intent. While walking, Candace finds an injured falcon, crying in distress. Since she can understand the language of the bird, for she is wearing the golden ring given by the knight, she asks the falcon on what's going on or what's wrong. Candace picks it up to speak to it, and the falcon tells her a story of a handsome hawk, her lover, who left her when he fell in love with a kite. Candace felt pity for the falcon and even all her women maids, though they can't understand the bird. Candace then takes the falcon and brings it to her home. When they arrive, she dug herbs to heal her injury. She nursed her carefully with all her might and put her in a cage and placed it in her bedside. At this point, the squire will tell about the magic ring and Candace's brothers and father, but before that, he will tell first the stories about other heroes. However, as soon as he begins to tell the third part of his story, Franklin interrupts, congratulating him for his eloquent storytelling. Harry Bailey, the host, then tells Franklin that it is now his turn to tell a tale. With this, the squire's tale remains unfinished. The story the squire begins to tell seems to be a romance, and it bears some resemblance to another interrupted tale, like Chaucer's story of Sir Thopas. Both take place in spring among its singing birds, involve magic or magical beings, and feature characters of high rank. Yet, within the romance narrative is the very unromantic story told by the Lady Falcon whose lover left to be with another. The connection between story and storyteller is clear in this tale. The squire is a calaver's youth who has traveled to many exotic lands and has likely heard stories of magical horses, rings, and other fantastical objects. As the knight's son, He is familiar with the genre of epic romance and of the way one tells such a story. Franklin even compliments the squire's storytelling style as being very eloquent. His characters are idealized. The king is powerful and wise and brave, compassionate and just, while the heroine Candace is beautiful beyond the squire's ability to describe. The tone, the author's attitude toward the subject is similar to that Chaucer's Sir Thopas story. Both are a little silly, and the plots advance due to odd details. In Sir Thopas, the song of spring birds calls sends him suddenly and forcefully into love longing. In this story, Candace gets up for her walk while everyone else sleeps off hangovers. The squire's storytelling style is verbose and convoluted, which may be why Franklin cuts him off. Chaucer may be making fun of the romance genre, or he may be using the squire to mock his own ambitions as a storyteller. After all, his Canterbury Tales project was originally conceived of as 120 stories, mainly containing stories within stories, a plan that proved overly ambitious and which he ultimately pared back to 24 stories. Now, let's hear the tale told by the nuns priests. Long time ago, there dwelt a poor widow in a small cottage with fencing yard together with her two daughters. She keeps a few animals, 3 sows, 3 cows, a sheep called Muley, and a number of chickens including a rooster named Chanticleer. In her yard that was enclosed by a stockade and a dry ditch without, she kept Chanticleer. He was great at crowing, where all in the land he had no peer, and a master in some measure of 7 hens were all there to do his pleasure. One dawn began to spring, when all chickens, including Chanticleer and his 7 hens, perched in the poor widow's hall. Lady Pertilute, with the loveliest dice upon her throat, courteous, discreet, debonair, companionable, and Chanticleer's favorite wife was next to him on the perch. Chanticleer began to groan and lurch, like someone sorely troubled by a dream, and as soon as Lady Pertilute hears his roar and scream, she wakes him up and asks, "What's wrong?" He said, "I had a terrible dream that caused me scream, and my heart still beats so fast." And then he tells his nightmare to her. "I dreamed that I am roaming up and down a while. Within our yard, I saw a kind of beast with glowing red eyes, a sort of hound that tried or seemed at least to try and seize me, would have killed me dead. His color was a blend of yellow and red. His ears and tail were tipped with sable fur. His snout was small, and unlike the rest, he was russet color. Lady Pertilute makes fun of him and tells that he is a coward and his dream has no meaning, and then she picks some herbs from the yard to restore the balance of his health and stop his bad dreams. However, Chanticleer is still worried and keep on insisting that his dream is an omen of things to come. To make Pertilute believes him, he tells a story he read from books, a story of a man who dreamed his friend was being murdered for his gold and woke up to find that it had happened. Also, a story of 2 men going to a sea voyage. One dreamed that if he went to sea, the next day he would be drowned, but his friend laughed at him, so he went anyway, only to drown. After telling his stories, Chanticleer refused the herbal remedies which is specially made by Pertilotte for him. He then tells her to stop telling prophecies, for while he's with her, all his thought of terror and confusion dies, and tells a creed he knows, mulier est homines confusion, Latin tag meaning woman is man's delight and all his bliss. Later, outside the yard, Chanticleer, in all his pride, together with his 7 wives at his side, with blissful voice crew triumphantly. In a sudden, there comes a fox who breaks through the fence into the yard. The fox watches Chanticleer for a while and convinces him that he was a friend and he just wants to listen his beautiful voice while he is singing. Chanticleer is flattered. When he starts to demonstrate his singing, the fox grabs him by the throat and runs off into the woods. His hens make a loud noise that a widow and her 2 daughters come rushing. They chase the fox. The man and woman shouted, "Run!" and cursed, and even all their animals, including the swarm of bees. Chanticleer, laying upon the fox's back, convinces the fox to look back and shout insult and curses to the people and animals chasing him. Foolishly, he did what Chanticleer said. He opens his mouth, and Chanticleer takes the opportunity. He jumps free and flies up into the tree. When he was into the treetop, the fox again tells him that he's a friend and he didn't mean any harm to him. The fox convinces him to calm down, but at this time, Chanticleer never listened to the fox and refused to go down, for he knows that the fox is trying to trick him again. At the conclusion of the story, Harry Bailey complements the nun's priest tale and turns to another storyteller. As a fable, this story is in keeping with other types of stories in the genre, many of which involve a tricky fox and some sort of prey that ultimately gets the better of the fox. The legacy of this storyline can be seen in modern times, in cartoon characters such as Willy E. Coyote and Roadrunner. Only a small percentage of this line in this tale actually advance the story. For example, a large number of lines are given to Chanticleer's argument for the importance of dreams. He relates in detail many stories in which dreams and their meanings were significant, such as those from the biblical book of Daniel. Despite his own argument, Chanticleer takes no action based on the dream and is quite surprised when a fox does enter the yard. Chaucer may be poking fun at people who engage in debate for the sake of argument, not for a practical purpose. He may also be mocking the monk whose own tale was nothing but a tedious list of exempla. Most fables end with a single lesson or moral. This story does not have just one, but several. Chanticleer learns to be wary of tricksters who want you to close your eyes when you should keep them open. The fox learns that he should keep his mouth shut. The nun's priest adds that people should be on guard against flatterers and invites listeners to learn from this seemingly silly tale. And if you think my story is absurd, take hold upon the moral, gentlemen. With these words, the nun's priest suggests his audience might see themselves in both the proud but gullible Chanticleer and skeptical and disdaining hen and a tricky and flattering fox. The nun's priest fable meets with great approval by the setting, the story By the setting, the story in a barnyard, the nun's priest seems to be preparing to tell a simple fable. Like the monk, the rooster Chanticleer gives a long list of illustrative examples that reveal an astonishing breadth of learning. But unlike the monk, Chanticleer does it in a wildly entertaining way. Chaucer seems to say that this is what learning combined with a true talent for storytelling looks like. The Pardoner's Tale. Before he begins his story, the pardoner describes his preaching methods. He says frankly that he puts on quite a show, and all for the purpose of manipulating people to give money rather than any true concern for their souls. He uses the same text each time and preaches often about avarice, the sin of greed, while living a very greedy and selfish life. After describing how corrupt he is, he reassures the company that he is still able to tell a moral tale. For though I am a wholly vicious man, don't think I can tell moral tales. He begins his tale by introducing the characters and setting. In Flanders, there lived a company of young men given to every kind of vice, including gluttony and drunkenness. Having introduced them, he launches into a tirade against gluttony, saying it is the main cause of human grief and misery. He supports this claim with several examples from the Bible and from history. This leads to similar warnings against gambling, lying, and swearing in God's name. Then he continued his tale. One night, the three rioters drink and getting drunk and playing a dice in a tavern. As they sat, these three young men took a glance outside as they heard the handbell clink and noticed a group of men carrying a corpse to its burial. They learned from the boy in the tavern that the dead man in the corpse was their friend and they used to know before, and that he was slain upon his bench last night by a thief called Death, who speared and stabbed him through his heart. The boy mentioned that this same thief killed 1,000 in the present plague and warns them to be ready to face death if they should meet him, to be primed to meet him everywhere they go, as this is what all he knows and have been said by his mother. The publican joined and tells that this thief likely lives in a nearby town, in a large village, where this very year he killed a man, women, serf at tillage, page in the household, and children. The three young men decide to pursue the thief, make a vow to kill him, and up they started in their drunken rage towards this village which the publican said to them before. On their way, not fully half a mile, just as they were about to cross a stile, they met a very poor old man and humbly greeted them. One of the rioters asked him why he is still alive at his old age. Then the old man answered that death never yet found him. They think that the old man knows death's whereabouts, so they threaten him to tell them where they can find the thief. Eventually, the old man tells and directs them that they can find death up the crook way underneath an oak tree in a nearby grove. The young men go and found the tree. Under it are 8 bushels of gold coins, and they become distracted. They argue as they believe that the fortune has given them a treasure and decide to wait until it is dark to sneak it away with it. One of them suggests they draw lots to see who will runs back to the town for a bread and wine, while the other two guard the treasure. They draw lots and the youngest of them is sent to town. No sooner he leaves, the other two plot to kill the youngest on his return and split his share of the gold between them. The younger man has a similar idea, and as he reaches the town, he realizes to protect himself and decided to buy poison. He then buys 3 bottles of wine and put the poison to the 2 bottles, intending to give it to the 2 rioters. When the youngest returns, brings the bread and bottles of wine. However, they set on him and kill him. The 2 then sit down and drink the wine to celebrate. When they drink the poisoned bottles of wine, they also die. After his tale, the pardoner offers his service to the company for a fee, of course. Harry Bailey insults him, making the pardoner angry. The knight attempts to make peace between them. The pardoner is very conscious of himself as storyteller. Before he begins his story, he gives a surprising amount of information regarding to his own preaching style. Most of this information is rather unflattering as he describes the various ways he manipulates people into giving him money. Yet, he clearly sees himself as a wordsmith capable of influencing his listeners through his language. He then gives listeners a taste of his preaching. The story of the 3 young men is embedded within this sermon as a sort of sermon illustration or exemplum. He prefaces this tale by saying it is a story he would often preach when out for winning. In other words, motivated by greed. He would preach about the folly of greed. He ends the story by saying, "That, sirs, is how I preach," and then he attempts to make money off the pilgrims. The pardoner's tale is integral to understanding his character and his stated goals, emphasizing the connection between story and storyteller that is an overall theme of the Canterbury Tales. The lessons of the embedded story itself are fairly clear. Sinful behavior, gluttony, drunkenness, greed, murder ultimately results in death. Its moral is you reaped what you sow. The man's goal of setting out to destroy death is tantamount to blasphemy, as the man presumed to equate their own power with that of God. Questions around the role of the man in the story. Chaucer could have written the story without this mysterious character because his effect on the plot is fairly minimal and could have been accomplished other ways. So why is he there at all? One explanation may be that the old man's literal quest for death highlights the young man's foolishness in their quest for death, whom they envision as human thief and murderer, not as each man's inevitable fate. Another explanation may be that the Black Plague, which raged at the time the story was written, was known for its tendency to kill the young and healthy, while the old and frail lingered on. Yet, another explanation is that the young man's disrespect for old age further condemns them.